Greetings, everybody. I'm Brian Singh from Brian's Table, and today I have a special guest, Marcello Di Cintio. And Marcello, say hi to our viewers.
Hello, Brian's viewers. I'm happy to be in your kitchen.
Excellent. And Marcello is a friend of mine, and he's also a writer, but he's also a travel writer and also loves food and wine.
This is true.
This is true. So to get Marcello over here, I offered up some Barolo.
Yes, otherwise I wouldn't come.
You wouldn't come. And I know one of the things in one of your jobs that you've had in the past, you've had a little habit of acquiring Barolo from some of the places you worked.
I wish it was more of a habit, but yes.
And what was it about Barolo that really spoke to you?
I like big Italian wines.
Right.
You know, I worked in restaurants almost my entire life.
Right.
And I had to learn about the wines, of course, right? And I did a lot of fine dining. And you can keep your fruit-forward, New World, California stuff. Give me an earthy French or Italian big red, and it just makes me happy. It feels serious.
Is it something about the rustic nature of these wines?
Yeah, yeah, there's something about, and I think this is what we'll probably get into when we talk about kind of my approach to food and stuff like it. I like the rusticness, the earthness, the antiquity. I like food and wine that is a flashback to 200 years ago, not what the current trend happens.
So when the hygiene may have been a little bit less, and they were still stomping the grapes.
Yeah, maybe just after that.
Just after that.
Just after that.
Well, again, of the earth, we have a terra. How do you say this? Terra del Barolo.
Terra del Barolo.
Okay, again, my apologies, folks. My Italian is not very good. And one thing about this wine, and I'll put all the notes in the video, so you guys don't have to sweat it. But this is one thing I like about these guys. They have a little. What's their motto? It's drink good wine.
Yes.
But also interestingly, in terms of what this wine represents, it's actually a cooperative wine.
Oh, interesting.
Right? So it is actually from Barolo, and it's from 11 of the villages, and there are 300 plus growers who get their grapes in this wine.
Oh, how interesting.
I know, it's but also it has the extended aging, 38 months compared to the required 24 months, but I could go into all those details. But, again, let's get into what makes this wine great, and then we'll get back to our conversation. Let's do a quick little toast.
Cheers.
Okay, let's do a sniff first. Let's get the nose. All right, now this is exactly what you talk about. You get that rustic nose. Mm-hmm. You get a little bit of the orange, but one thing about these rustic wines, when they're this fine, there's a sexiness to them, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely there is.
Right? It smells like pheromones.
Yes, it smells like I want to spend the night with this wine.
Yes, it's like you want to enjoy it slowly.
Yes.
There's a sensuality to this
and not at the end of the night either. This is the begin. You begin with this.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, the cheap wine can come later.
Yeah.
But you set the stage with this wine.
Yes.
Anyhow, let's give it a taste.
Cheers. Oh, that's beautiful.
Oh my God. That's delicious. All the flavors there, high tannin, high acid, but the fruit is just relaxing.
Yeah, at the end there, and it doesn't. Yeah.
It's beautiful.
That's lovely. Thank you very much.
So anyhow, what got you hooked on Marolas? You talked about the funkiness, but when did you have your first one?
Oh, geez, it's funny. I came to food and wine first through because I had to for professional reasons.
Right.
So I wish I had this wonderful story to tell you about being in the middle of an Italian countryside and trying it for the first time, or being on a date with a beautiful person. But no, it was probably at a pre-shift tasting with a wine rep coming into a restaurant to do that sort of stuff. So something completely unsexy and unromantic.
Right.
But yeah, so like I said before, these are the kinds of these kinds of serious European wines, especially Italian and French, for me in particular, is just yeah, it feels mature.
Right.
It feels serious, like I said, and I think that's what I like about it.
You feel more grown up.
It feels grown up. It feels grown up.
It does. You know, it's
like, yeah, these raspberry jam California cabs. That's for children.
Right. But you know, the moment you actually have this, you actually do feel I'm out of my age.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
This wine matches the gray in my beard.
Yes. You know, it's like I've earned the right for this wine.
Just by living this long.
Exactly. You know. But you know, again, you grew up Italian. Well, you are Italian.
I still am. I'm still growing up Italian.
You know, what was there anything in growing up? Yeah, and you did grow up in Calgary.
I did. Yeah.
So, like, how was it like growing up Italian in Calgary and having to deal with food and wine issues that the family had?
Yeah, it's an interesting. Like for
the Italian heritage.
All the men in my family made wine.
Right.
They made bad wine. Let's be frank. My grandfather though had a press in his garage.
Really?
And a press in his garage, and he had this stone, like this big rock,
right,
that he would use to weigh some part of it down, like
right,
during the process.
Really?
And he'd use the same stone for like decades, right? And so the stone was dyed purple, it's probably purple an inch deep, and he was convinced that this is the lucky stone for the wine. Like this is what would always make his wine good.
Where did you get the grapes from?
From the Italian stores,
okay,
which is where Italians still get their wine, I think, from the Italian stores. At one point, one of my uncles owned one of those, the Italian Superette on Edmonton Road, which does not exist anymore.
Okay.
But yeah, so my grandfather, my father, my uncles would make wine, and it was they weren't making it for the taste. They would age it for a matter of weeks.
Right.
And it was harsh, and my first exposure to it as a kid is I would drink it as a child, but me and my sisters and my cousins would have it at dinner when we were a big family gathering, and we just put it in our 7-Up and our Sprite. And so we would have wine and Sprite. And I swear, Brian, I would still drink that right now.
Right.
Like there's something about that.
Is it nostalgic?
It's nostalgic. It's it's a kid's thing. Like it's sweet.
Right.
But we used to spike our Sprite with wine, and not surreptitiously. Like that was just what we all did.
Was that the way they did?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I know. Like things have changed quite a bit around the whole culture of drinking.
That's
as
true.
As a kid, right?
That's true.
But also in Italy, pretty much when you're born, you're drinking, right?
Yeah. It's true. And as far as food goes, I think I come from a kind of a classic Italian family where, all the women, my mom and my aunts and my nonna were and are fantastic cooks. And they had their repertoire and very classic dishes.
Right.
Especially until relatively recently, I think that, they didn't stray too far away from those recipes that they've always made.
Right.
I grew up. My mother on Sundays would always make lasagna every single Sunday.
Really?
And we would go to the Italian church for mass.
Right.
And we'd come back and we'd have my mom's lasagna. Right. Now that didn't last too long, and neither did going to mass.
Right.
Italian mass anyway. Yeah. But that was always part of it. And so there are dishes and recipes that my sisters and cousins and I remember and still don't know how to make, were recipes that probably were never written down.
Right.
Yeah.
Are these ultra traditional recipes, or are they just family recipes?
Oh, I don't even know if I knew growing up.
Right. Because
it's very certainly very unique to the part of Italy that my family's from Abruzzo, right? So like we had cookies at Easter that only Abruzzese ever eat these cookies, right? And then there's certain we would never there's certain sauces that we would never ever have, because that's from another part of Italy,
right?
A puttanesca sauce, which is one of my favorite things, which my son adores, these garlicky capers anchovy pasta sauce. Okay. That's unheard of in my family. That just wasn't done.
Is that because it just wasn't from the region?
It just wasn't regional. Okay. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
So did you grow up with all the rules of Italian food?
You know, maybe.
Because again, there are lots of rules, right?
There are lots of rules. I think no, I wouldn't. I grew up eating my linguine and spaghetti with a fork and a spoon. And if you don't give me a spoon, I'm going to ask you for a spoon.
Right.
You know, I remember. You know, this is. Italians are so terrible for this, but you know, looking down on other people's cuisines, right? And I remember my family would say, my father I think would say something like, oh, you know what, Canadians eat for dinner. They'll eat sandwiches for dinner. Like this is like shameful. Like you want a sandwich for dinner. So we never had sandwiches for dinner.
Right.
But not everything was great. We also, cooked our steaks so they were well done and gray. And it wasn't until I was a teenager working in restaurants I realized, oh my goodness, I've been eating ruined steak my entire life. And my father worked at behind the meat counter at Safeway. It was his,
really?
And so he'd come home. We'd have steak almost every day, Brian.
Okay.
And he'd come home with like yesterday's tenderloin, and so he'd get it at a crazy discount, and then he'd just cook the crap out of it, and we didn't know what we were missing until we were quite a little bit older.
That's quite amazing. So, given that whole family background, how one of the things I realized, and it's also been quite a journey for me into actually doing this whole channel thing, is realizing how much of my childhood I valued the food that I grew up with.
Yeah. And
that I'm not necessarily trying to replicate it now, but the intent of what food did then was so important. It's still important to me.
Yeah, and not just individual dishes either, although that is also the case, but also the meals. Like I remember, God, it has to be 20 years ago now. Was every Christmas Eve we'd have dinner at my grandmother's house.
Right.
And it was a seafood, right? It was like course upon course upon course of Italian seafood.
Right.
2 pastas.
Right.
And we always would go to my grandma's on Christmas Eve. Right. But then as the family grew, right? The kids grew up and got married and had their own kids, and so it became like just logistically impossible. Right. There's just too many people to have in my grandmother's basement.
Right.
And I remember like the first year that we decided to splinter off. Like each family was going to do their own thing with their new in-laws and whatever. Being so devastated by it. And I knew logistically it made complete sense. Like I'm not an idiot. Like I understood the reasoning why, and I agreed with the reasoning why.
Right.
But there was something I was really emotional about. That was the end of something, and I couldn't imagine having Christmas Eve with just these people and not all those people.
Right.
And not having my grandmother in the kitchen doing it.
Right.
And she was she's still around. Like she's just celebrated her birthday. She's 95. She's 95.
Is she still making those meatballs?
She's not making the meatballs. Oh, that's a whole other thing. But just when all that changed, because it had to.
Right.
It struck me in an emotional way that surprised me how deep that feeling was.
Right.
I was traumatized.
How different was that for you experiencing that in Calgary compared to your friends? I'm curious.
Compared to like my other Italian friends, or just friends in general?
I talked to the Italian friends.
It's probably similar.
It's very similar, but like you're going to school and you get Italian leftovers.
God, you know what, Brian? I don't know if we ever talked about that.
Okay.
I don't know if we ever did.
Was it a different way than when you started to look at some of your friends in school? Or, I'm just curious.
No, I don't know. I don't know if that was ever. It's interesting. I was thinking about this before coming here, but kind of thinking about my life, like when I became most interested and borderline kind of obsessed with food, and it was relatively late, and it wasn't in those early times. Like I knew that I loved going to my grandmother's to eat. I knew I loved my mother's lasagna. I knew I loved these sort of things, right? I knew which aunt cooked better than which other aunt. But that wasn't outside, like off the table. I don't think I thought about it very much, and there's these stories that people have about bringing their lunch to school and everyone open up their lunch box and comparing that. I don't remember having those conversations really either. Other than I remember my, having fennel, like raw fennel, in my lunch bag as a kid, we called it finocchio, right?
Right.
And no one else had finocchio.
No.
No one, and I'd pull it out of my lunch bag when I was in grade 3 or grade 4. they were like, oh my God, you're eating like an onion? Like, what are you eating? Like, they'd never seen such a thing before.
Right.
And like raw fennel is something that kind of ends a meal for Italians, and it's
palate cleanser.
Palate cleanser. And but what are the in India they use the candy coated fennel seeds. It's the same idea. It's a digestion aid. And but other than that, other than those occasional weird things in my lunch,
right.
I don't think I thought about food when I was off the table until I was into my adulthood, I think.
What was the moment?
I think part of it was me moving out for the first time and then cooking for myself.
Right.
But I think it probably happened. It's funny. My love of cooking does not come from my family. Mm-hmm. My love of cooking came from working in restaurants, and I was never a cook.
Okay.
I was always in front of house. I always was a server, bartender, busboy, right?
Okay.
But being around food made me want to make it.
Okay.
I didn't go, I worked at Boston Pizza, I worked at Earl's, and so those places, I didn't want to cook that kind of food.
Right.
But just being around the kitchens made me want to do it. And I remember being up late at night, and I was still living with my mom at this time. It was some infomercial or something for a cookbook, Food of Southern Italy, by Carlo Midione, who recently passed away, I think. And so it's the first thing I ever bought off the television.
Right.
Maybe the only thing I've ever bought off the television. And it's this big fat yellow cookbook, the Foods of Southern Italy. I still have it. Mm-hmm. It's falling apart. Mm-hmm. The binding's all torn up. It's covered in sauce.
Right. Of course.
And I still cook out of it, and I still love it. And there's something about, and maybe my new answer to your old question is, I think maybe when I bought that book was a moment that something changed.
Have you introduced your son to the recipes in that book?
No, but I do. Well, not purposely from that book, but I'm raising a Italian food snob. You know what I mean? He's only half Italian,
right?
But that half I am nurturing.
So as an incidence in terms of his food preference, it's 100% Italian almost.
Yeah. So
I jest.
It's interesting because him and his mother and I split a few years ago,
right.
And he has almost every dinner with me. He comes to my house for dinner almost every day. Mm-hmm. And so I do provide. His mom makes him breakfast and lunch, but the big meal is mine.
Right.
And so through those big meals, I think he's got an appreciation of. He's starting to like what I like, and a lot of it's Italian stuff. A lot of it's Middle Eastern stuff based on my travels. I think we're going to talk about.
Right. Yeah. Of course.
But he loves my fettuccine carbonara, and he knows there's not supposed to be smoked bacon or cream in there.
Right.
But
bring it on.
Yeah, he loves that kid won't eat chicken fingers, but I make him a pasta sauce that's loaded with anchovies and capers, and he loses his mind for it. So I've messed up his palate.
Yeah, so where does he go from here?
Yeah. I don't know. He's an expensive date, that's for sure. We go to the restaurant, and that kid's never ordered off a kid's menu in his life.
No, he can't.
What's he gonna eat? Chicken nuggets, please. But that's something we share. And in fact, this Christmas, and I might even get choked up a little bit, so I gotta prepare myself. He bought me for Christmas a cookbook. A notebook that's for recipes, and it was such a clearly he was thinking about what I would like.
Right.
And then he said to me, he says, I was thinking that you can write in this book all the stuff that we both really like, and then one day you can give it to me.
Oh. That's a touching.
Isn't that? See, I get a little choked up. It was such a beautiful thought.
But it's a beautiful thing because it's something you both share.
Exactly.
And it's something that you actually do work on together.
Yeah.
I like how has his knife skills come along.
Oh, we're working on the knife skills. He's certainly better than I was when I was 13. Right. But he could do better. He doesn't love to cook.
Right.
He just has an odd palate for a 13-year-old. think. But I drag him in the kitchen every now and again, and just chop this or measure this out or whatever, and he doesn't love it. He'd rather not.
Right.
Hopefully that'll change.
Right.
When I give him a book of recipes, he's got to do something with that.
Right.
Yeah, it's something that we share. It means a lot to me.
Right.
It means an awful lot to me.
So one of the things, again, are you also introducing your son? And I know this is something that we chat about. Is you do like to get the best possible ingredient for anything that you're doing. You do.
As much as one can.
I know.
Yeah.
Because again, I recall we had this wonderful chat about when I was going to Turkey. You said we need to go over to Karakoi on the other side. Because
the
they
Asian
have all
market,
the vendors and they have all the regional specialities
Yes.
over there. Blew my mind.
Yeah.
Right? But that was also a very formative thing for me in terms of just realizing that regionality and all these specialized food items are like the lifeblood of some of these countries.
Yeah.
Right? And in your travels, like I know the big first trip you did was going down to West Africa, right? Mm-hmm. Did you have any of those food experiences there?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's funny. Compared to a lot of the places that I've visited, West Africa cuisine is not. Food obviously is important as it is everywhere else. Gathering to eat is important for family, for social, all that kind of stuff. The same it is in most places. But as a cuisine, Ghana's cuisine is not, very. Not necessarily that interesting.
Right.
It's in the way that Cuba is not the best place to eat, but Mexico is. You know what I mean? But it was of the relatively small variety of dishes that I was exposed to. Some of them were completely bizarre to my palate, and that was really interesting. Like I lived for 3 months. I was volunteering at a school in Danu, which is on the Ghana east coast of Ghana, and there in Ghana in general, but in this part in particular, like the starch that is served with every meal, almost every meal, is this fermented corn dough.
Right.
Like it's sour corn dough.
Right.
And the first time you taste it, it tastes like something's gone wrong.
Right. Yeah.
Very soon, I craved it every day. I mean, there was something, so there was these flavors that I had never experienced before.
Right.
That were now like there's no sour in my family's cuisine.
I'm trying to think about Italian food.
Yeah, other than or vinegar on your salad.
Right.
But there's nothing sour. And there was dishes that were like smoked fish with something fermented in it, and these combinations of flavors, and then excessive heat sometimes, right? Like the Scotch bonnet peppers is just crazy, and so it was certainly an interesting food place for someone who hadn't experienced it. And I traveled all around that part of the Western Africa, and you could tell where the British had their influences and where the French did, right? So you cross the border from Ghana into Togo, which for me was literally like a 20-minute drive from where I was staying. It was the border crossing. And the cuisine completely changes because that was a former French colony. Right. So in addition to this kind of the traditional West African cuisine, there's influences. There's baguettes on the streets.
Wow. So therefore,
and the food, and it's better. I mean,
it's funny what the influence of the French was.
Yeah, of course it's better. But then parts of West Africa that not a lot grows. I would spend a lot of time on the Sahara Desert, on the edge of the desert. Like there's. What grows around there.
Right.
You go to the marketplace and you find a few tomatoes and some onions and maybe guava some days, and usually trucked up from somewhere else. But there's not much.
It's heavy meat cuisine, isn't it?
It's a meat, yeah.
But we'll get to the Middle East again. But one of the things that also kind of blew my mind when you get out to like Africa and the Middle East, the respect for the animal is just that much more You know, like I love going to the Middle East, and you go to the butcher shop and they have the pictures of the animals outside. You remember this?
I do.
And they show you, it's like, oh no, this animal had the best life. You know? So again, it's a very different relationship. Like, you know, like here in North America, they show you the cut of the meat.
Yeah.
Right? But on the outside of the butcher shop, and there it's like the animal.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But you know, like you want to know you're getting a good animal more so when you're in a more meat-based cuisine.
Yeah, I think that's probably true.
Right.
But you know, that trip, I wouldn't have become a writer if it wasn't for that trip, and I wouldn't have become a writer if it wasn't for the food.
Right.
Because I spent a year on that trip.
Right.
363 days, like almost exactly a year.
Right.
I know that because my ticket home would have expired in 2 months.
Tickets were weird back then.
I had it in my back. I had a paper ticket in my backpack for a year.
I still, you know, like I still have some of my old tickets, and also, you know, I know we joked about the whole thing with Post Restaurant, which is a whole universe unto itself.
Yeah.
And you know, I wish that the younger generation got it, but you know, it is that thing about you're so isolated.
Very isolated.
But it's also, you know, you have to kind of make ends meet.
Yeah.
Wherever you are when you are traveling like that.
Yeah.
And you know, like I'm sure in that first time away like that, there's a lot of that in there too.
Oh, and it was in the late 90s.
Right.
So there was no internet,
Right.
no email, phone to call home. There was no cell phones.
Right.
Not in Africa.
Right.
At the time, to call home would cost you more than my hotel would cost.
No, it's not.
So I was really, you know, there are times where I didn't correspond with my family for like 6 weeks.
Right.
You know, I remember my mother losing her mind. She didn't know I was in Mauritania, you know, and she didn't know what was going on.
She was mortified.
Yeah, it was. And it was funny. At the end of that trip, my sister came and joined me in Morocco, and so we had which Morocco was, you know, compared to the West Africa that I'd come out through was Africa light.
Yes.
But then you're talking about great food and all that kind of stuff there.
Did it make a difference that you show up in Morocco with your sister and eating?
Yeah, we had, yes, and it was kind of like the first time I ever done anything with my sister that wasn't like us and everyone else. You know, It was the only time that her and I did something together, and we were 2 months.
Right.
2 months in Morocco.
Wow.
Yeah, it was so fun. And so we did in 2 months we saw a lot of the country, and we took our time. And we saw as many things as we can. We ate lots, and my sister and I are not fussy. And I'll tell you a story about my sister and I are in Morocco, and we're on some overnight bus trip or something. And so the bus stops, and everyone kind of wearily comes out because this is where we're gonna eat.
Right.
And so we go into this little kind of roadside shack lit by candles or lanterns, and there was like a row of tagine.
Right.
You know, all bubbling on the fire.
Right.
And so tagine really good for 2 people.
Right.
So Sonia, my sister, and I, we have a tagine. We don't even like there's no selection.
Right.
This is what you're eating. This is what's to eat. So we have our tagine.
This is what.
Yeah. So we put it in front of us. They take the lid off, and it's clearly some sort of meat. You know, it's probably lamb, and it's a beautiful bread. Like, it was delicious. Like, it would probably cost, you know, a nickel. You know what I mean?
Right,
Like,
yeah.
And so we're getting to the bottom of it, and there's like one morsel left there, and I say to Sonia, I go, "Is that what I think it is?" She's like, "It looks like a nipple." I'm like, "It must be a nipple, right?"
Right.
Like, there's no. We're trying to think what other part of the animal looks like. No, it's just the nipple.
Right.
And she's like, "Are you gonna?" I said, "Are you gonna eat it?" She's like, "I'm gonna eat it." I'm like, "Well, I guess it was give it a shot." So I like bit the tip off this sheep's nipple as the final morsel of this tagine, and I did not enjoy it.
Okay.
I did not enjoy it. Not my favorite part. Not my favorite part of the lamb.
Again, I think, you know, we've all been in situations where you end up in this like, well, this is what's being served.
Yeah.
I'm going to eat it.
Sure.
Right? And
Sure.
I've eaten, look, we've all eaten some strange shit over the years.
Yeah. But that trip, that's why I'm a writer, because I came back from that trip, and I started. I wanted to write. I felt I had all these wonderful stories. You know, you spend a year in West Africa. Every day something interesting happened.
Right.
And so
you can't avoid it.
You can't avoid it, and sometimes terrible things. I mean,
Yes,
I
I
was
know.
I almost died of malaria on that trip. I was cut in a knife robbery on that trip. But the first thing I did when I came back is I was like, what stories can I pitch to a magazine and to sell? And so my first ever paid writing gigs were with City Palette here in Calgary, which was the, we all miss City Palette very much, kind of the bi-monthly free food magazine.
Right.
And so I would write kind of travel, weird things I ate in Africa stories for City Palette.
Right.
I look back at some of those old stories, and clearly written by a first-time writer.
Right.
This embarrassing use of alliteration, for example. Pretty, a lot of like white guy abroad type stuff. But that was my first published.
What were the foods that you wrote about? Were you writing about the tagine as well?
I don't remember if I wrote the tagine. I wrote about drinking this kind of fermented beer in Mali. I remember that. I wrote about making pasta sauce for my family, my host family in Ghana.
Right.
And how unimpressed they were by it.
They're like, what is this?
It tastes like nothing. There's no spice in here. I must have written about Morocco too. I wrote about the kind of the mint tea ritual in the Sahara. And so my first paid work was writing about food.
Right.
I wouldn't have been here if it wasn't for that.
Was that a catalytic event for you? Was it?
I think so.
Right,
It was career-wise. It certainly was.
Right.
And I think people have asked me like, why do travel writers write about food so much? And the flippant answer is it's really easy because there's a built-in narrative often with a meal has a beginning and a middle and an end, you consume a thing till it's gone, but you also have this. It's an event, and whether it's just you by yourself on a street corner or you in a home surrounded by people, like it comes with this built-in arc, a built-in narrative.
But it comes in with the cultural context.
Yeah.
It also comes in with what grows there.
Yeah. Sure.
But it also comes in like, this is a dish of this country.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So in some regards, you aren't doing your job by using this device as food to tell a bigger story.
Yeah, no, it's true. I think though that what travel writers who write about food need to go beyond that though. Like, and I look at those early stories that I'm talking about, and I hope I would never write like that. Like, very superficial, very white guys in Africa stories.
Right.
I think there's been. I think we might have hit peak food writing, food travel writing. So I think it behooves writers to dig a little bit deeper when they write about food when they travel. So not just this is the meal. Like, what does this meal represent? How did this food get here? What are the politics around it?
Right.
I think it's we should look beyond what's on our plates.
So when did that change for you?
Middle East. My first big trip was the year I spent in West Africa. My second big trip, I spent 3 months in Israel, Palestine, and Egypt around the turning of the millennium.
Right.
And it was during that time I really became interested in the politics of that particular region, and everything is imbued with politics, right? Everything is.
Well, even down to the difference between falafels.
Yeah, absolutely. Hummus. You can argue about all the origins of all those sorts of things, and then you can argue about the origins of all these dishes, and then argue about why that argument is important.
Right.
And I think that second part is the more interesting.
Give me an example.
You want to argue is hummus an Israeli dish or a Palestinian dish?
Or is it an Arabic dish?
Or an Arabic dish, right? Yes, you can track the origins if you like.
Right.
But then the question is, well, who cares? What difference does it make?
Right.
It makes a difference. You know why? Because it's part of a larger story. If we look at Israel, Palestine, Israel has taken territory, land, lives, culture.
Right.
And here's another thing.
Right.
Hummus.
Right.
And yeah, is that a big deal? Not in its, maybe not in itself, maybe not in isolation, but as part of a grand theft of a person, of an entire culture, then it does make it means something.
So when you're in Palestine, how do they relate to hummus versus when you're in Israel?
Oh, I don't know. Well, I didn't spend a lot of time in Israel compared to my time in Palestine.
Right.
I don't know if those, I don't think those arguments are happening on the streets. You know what I mean?
No, they're not.
But I think though that particular food item, and falafels is another. It's everywhere. Right. And so no matter who you are, you'll lay claim to that being that's part of my culture. Right. And you can't deny that Israelis eat falafel and hummus all the time, constantly. Right. I'm envious of that because I love it.
But the other thing too is you also spend time in Egypt, and they do instead of chickpeas they use fava beans.
Not for falafel though. You mean?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know.
They do that little imprint with the sesame seeds.
Yes, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, that's with the fool, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Although I have to Egypt, the Middle Eastern food is good, but my God, koshari, could you come up with a better?
Oh, for like a
sorry, Egyptians.
One of the stories I wrote I wrote about kosher for City Palette.
Okay.
I did.
What do you have to say about kosher?
Well, listen, if you're a backpacker in your 20s and you're living off the least amount of money as possible on a trip, you're having kosher a lot when you're in Cairo. It's the cheapest thing, but I make it sometimes.
It's delicious. It's tasty, but again, as a iconic dish of a country.
Yeah. I mean, Egypt does not have. If you look at the Middle East, North Africa, and you were to pick the best cuisine, I don't think anyone would pick Egypt. I mean,
sorry, Egyptians.
Yeah, no. There's
They do.
They have the pyramids.
Yeah, they do so many other things well.
Yeah, love my time in Egypt.
So,
it's not the rest.
The pomegranate juice, top notch.
Yeah.
But no, right?
Yeah.
Let's get into the whole thing: Israel versus Palestine. How much time do you spend in Israel relative to Palestine? Not much, right?
Relatively not much. No,
right.
I mean my interest has always been on the other side of that.
But did you notice any differences between the foods, or?
I mean, yeah. I mean, Israeli cuisine is got far more is more cosmopolitan, right? It's got more influences from Europe, from elsewhere in the Middle East.
Right.
They're from Russia now, right? So it's kind of because it's where did these Jewish people come from? They came from everywhere,
right?
And so they brought with them the cuisines of the cultures that they had come from,
right?
So there it's wide ranging and very cosmopolitan.
Right.
It's also more it's more like the West in that it's a big restaurant culture, right? Like the way Europe is, right?
Right.
Fancy places and with composed dishes and plating this sort of stuff, which certainly exists in Palestine, but certainly much less.
Palestine is more like the street stuff with the hookah, and what things come on platters and.
Yeah, but I mean it's also very diverse, but certainly of the place, right? Like it's not you don't find a lot of European influences in Palestinian food, for example, but the wide ranging. I mean, and every time I go, I discover new stuff, and it's really interesting. I spent I'd been to Palestine like 8 times, and then went to and thought I'd eaten everything.
Right.
And then but I hadn't been to Gaza.
Right.
And so I spent 2 months in Gaza, and the food is completely. It's got all these different things I hadn't seen before.
Right.
Obviously, the seafood it features highly, but also this combination, which seems strange for my Western palate, of dill and chilies. So dill seed and chili. So it's spicy but dill.
Okay.
And that would appear all over the place.
Right.
And it's a very and now Miss Vicky's makes a chip like this, but back then
I never thought about it. Yes.
it was really a unique combination of flavors because both are familiar, but together they were completely different.
Right.
And Gazans like their food spicy, and kind of Palestinians in other parts of the country don't.
Which is odd because the proximity to Egypt.
Yeah, it's true. And the Egyptians don't like things spicy typically.
No, they don't.
No. So it's a unique. Gaza's got a really unique food culture. But then you look if you look at in the West Bank, you have everything from deserts to vineyards to orchards to everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So the amount of things that grow there is phenomenal. And so there's
So politically, let's get into that one. How much has the politics of the region influence the food choices? Is it a big deal? Is it a big thing, or does it speak to the identity of the region? Because again, you spent a lot of time there.
Well, it speaks to identity. I think Palestinians like a lot of cultures and groups really take pride and identify with their dishes. And they want they want to share those with you. They want you to have makluba and mansaf and these big kind of dishes that they would serve on special occasions.
Right.
Just you showing up is enough of a special occasion for that to be offered to you. It's just beautiful, right?
And it's embarrassing being a Westerner to the wealth of what they put out.
Yeah, it really is.
It's hard.
It really is.
The hospitality there is just second to none.
Yeah.
I've never experienced such friendly people in my life, and just it really does affect how you relate to the food.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's true, and I think it's and that's certainly common amongst all the places in the Middle East that I've traveled to. I think Iran, in particular, has kind of they've perfected hospitality in a way that's over the top and beautiful. Also, their food. We can talk about their food's completely different too.
Right.
But in Palestine, what's interesting is that Palestinians are aware, obviously of their own political situation, but also aware that outsiders may not know.
Right.
And so when you go there, not only are you welcomed into their homes, into their cafes, into all this sort of stuff, not only are you welcomed to Palestine, but there's a level of gratitude that you get. It's like, thank you. I heard it so many times. Thank you for coming.
Right.
And they don't mean just thank you for coming into the house and having some makluba. They mean thank you for coming here.
Right.
And go back and talk to people. The subtext is tell people where you're from, what's going on here, and what kind of people we really are.
Right.
And I really found that interesting in Palestine. Now, I saw that in Iran too, because Iranians, again, they understand that in the West they have this reputation, this unearned reputation of being dangerous and all this sort of stuff. And so they really want you to go back and tell the truth, which is completely the opposite.
Yeah, it is.
People have asked me, they go, did you feel unsafe in Iran? I go, I felt more unsafe in my grandmother's house.
It's true. No, I absolutely agree with you.
I go, the only time I was witnessed violence is when two people were fighting over who's going to take me home.
Yeah. Well, it's almost as if you have to tell people, very aggressively, I can't come to your house.
It was like this. I call it you're almost like a hostage. It's a hostage of their generosity.
Yeah, I know.
So Iranians also want, they love. I think it's inherent in their culture to treat guests like royalty anyway.
Right.
But when a Westerner comes, I think they especially a Canadian or American, but especially an American, they really kind of want you to go home and tell the truth of what Iranians actually are like.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated. We're on YouTube, but it's also watching the other YouTubers who go to Iran, and they find exactly what you've outlined.
It's amazing.
It's amazing.
Oh my God.
Did you experience going out to the little neighborhood bakeries, getting the sanga?
All that stuff, man. So I went to Iran twice.
Right.
The first time I was on a much lower budget than the second time. Right. So the first time I was eating, kebabs, and not really getting a good sense of the cuisine.
Right.
I went the second time. I secured a grant to work on a book, and so I was able to eat out.
Right.
And the amount of things that's going to open up to you.
It's amazing.
And unique, right? I mean, yes, we have there's kebabs around everywhere. but not with that much saffron.
No.
And you know, not that, you know, and not with the pistachios in the mince. And then you have all the combination of fruit and meat, which is with the Persians invented that. Now they exported it elsewhere.
Right.
But stews made with pomegranate, that's Persian. You know, dried limes.
Yes.
Just today I made at my home was with dried limes.
Okay.
And,
was the stew Fessingen? No.
it wasn't Fezzigen. It was like I used frike, so like Palestinian wheat.
Right.
But I made a spice blend with dried limes
Right.
and turmeric and stuff like that, which is
Your
very
kid is
Persian.
screwed for life.
I know. I keep telling him that. I keep telling him how lucky he is. I don't know if he believes it.
Oh, he will find out.
He'll learn. Yeah, he'll learn. But yeah, the food in Iran was really something, and so was dining out, and you know, it's often these beautiful restaurants aren't tables and chairs. They're like a raised platform covered in pillows and rugs, and you just lounge around, and you're eating off your elbows, and you feel like something out of a miniature painting, and you know, it's just remarkable. And then everyone around you is the friendliest person you've ever met, and they're all like beautiful, and like it's just I really miss it. I went to Iran 2 times when I didn't need a government minder. Right, that was in the time where the relationship between Canada and Iran was better.
Right.
This is pre-Harper.
Right. Yeah.
At that time, I could just go on a tourist visa.
Right.
And I can't do that anymore. Canadians can't do that anymore, and that's a huge tragedy. Is that right now no Canadian could do those trips that I did.
It's unfortunate because again, few other people are going to experience this level of hospitality, friendliness, but also there's so much to see and do there too. It's incredible.
Beautiful place.
Beautiful place. But the thing that I always get with that Persian cuisine, and you may have thoughts on this, it is in isolation relative to if you go west.
It's true.
And if you go east.
It's very unique to the place. Yeah.
It blows my mind.
Yeah.
And exactly what we talked about with Turkey, they have that level of appreciation for every regionality of every ingredient.
Yeah.
Right?
I remember. Yeah, I wrote about food in Turkey,
right.
And how like as an Italian, you know, I feel like I'm a food snob. No. The Turks have perfected food snobbery.
Right.
And I mean this with great affection.
Right. Yeah.
And so
more so than Japan and Italy?
I don't know Japan, but more than Italy, I would say.
Like Italy is up there for me in terms of food snobbery.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, and I'm
and
guilty as charged.
It's largely unjustified. I'd be quite honest. But
No, that's fair.
Right?
But when I'm talking about Turkey, what I mean is that like everything grows in Turkey, right? It's got every kind of temperate zone. You know, you can do everything there. There's 3 seas and all kinds of geography. But everyone knows where the best thing comes from.
Right.
So everyone in Turkey knows that the best peaches come from Bursa.
Okay.
Now you can have peaches from elsewhere in Turkey, and they might be good, but everyone knows that the best peaches are from Bursa. So if you're going to the market and you're having someone special come to your house that night, you're going to buy the Bursa peaches. If it's just your brother who's a pain in the ass, you're just going to get the peaches from somewhere else.
Right.
Yeah, best peaches from Bursa. Best garlic is from Kastamonu.
Right.
Why is it better? I don't know. The Turks know.
Right.
You know, everything. The best tea is from one place. Best tea, so there's this remarkable agreement of where the best things come from, and I've never been anywhere that's been like that. I think it feels like there's less. They don't argue about it. You know what I mean? Like it's we all know where it comes from.
So I could actually, Turkey was a place where I had quite a revelation, and it was the idea that certain things are just meant to be eaten together, right? And you know what it was? It was those mackerel sandwiches on the dock.
Yeah.
With that pickle juice. I don't know if you had that.
Right off of the Imanunu. Those are gone, hey? Yeah. They took those all out a few years ago.
But, you know...
It was amazing.
Like
the batik sandwiches.
That mackerel sandwich on its own, it's okay. That pickle juice on its own, it's not that great. But together...
I don't know.
This thing was magic.
They put pickle juice on those sandwiches?
No. They serve this thing. It's a pickle juice, and it's very sour,
Oh no, maybe I don't. Maybe I don't know
Yeah,
that.
maybe you didn't have that, but like it's right on the dock, right there in Istanbul, right by that bridge where you have all the people fishing on there.
Yeah.
But no, like there was this revelation.
Yeah, I know those boats. Those guys would sit on those
Right.
rocking boats and serve fish sandwiches all day.
Yeah, but you know, it was also like the attention, like making the Monty.
Yes.
Like Italy is great with doing the tortellini and whatnot, but the fine precision of those Monty.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wonderful.
But it's also the yogurt sauce that goes with it.
And the burnt garlic and the oil that goes on it.
It's like they
And the mint, and the dried mint.
And whatever you're drinking with that, it's going to go with that, right? It's like this was a revelation to me.
I'll tell you, and I'm saying this as someone whose name is Marcello Di Cintio, is that I think the best food in Europe is Turkish.
Really?
Best food country that I've been to.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
In all your travels, too.
All my travels, best food country in all my travels, Turkey.
Okay.
Absolutely, I wouldn't even
I would
hesitate.
put it up there too.
Yeah. There's just so much variety. There's so much, and the Turks also maybe they invented the idea of composing a plate. Because those old dishes where it's a something stuffed in something in a stack and this sort of stuff, and it's not just a scoop of something on a bowl.
Right.
Like it looks beautiful. Even if you go to those, I think they're called locantas, which are essentially just like cafeteria style tables. Even the stuff off of those are like beautiful, because that's part of it, right? I don't know if that's an Ottoman thing that spread elsewhere, but it certainly exists in Turkey.
I'm gonna bet because, like, again, just like the way that they lay out the kubide, or no, they didn't call it kubide there. They just call it kebabs, right? But like, how many varieties of kebabs are there in Turkey? It's just mind blowing.
Yeah.
Right, and the amount of bread that they have with it too.
Yeah,
but
no,
also,
I love
like
it.
the Turkish wine is also very good too.
I did have some really nice Turkish wine.
Where have been some of your favorite meals?
I was thinking about this before I came in, and there's so many that I could pick. Maybe it's because it was my first big trip abroad, but being in Ghana, at night, like instead of like a hot dog stand in front of the bars, they'll have these omelet stands, and so you'll sit down and someone will fry an egg with a lot of corn oil, some tomatoes, some onion, and then Maggi sauce. And they put it on a bit of bread, and it was just a most amazing thing. I'll have that for breakfast sometimes here, just as a throwback. And I have Maggi sauce just for that purpose.
Have you introduced your son to that?
Hates it. But I remember one time it was Turkish food, but it was on Cyprus. It was on kind of the Turkish third of northern Cyprus.
Right. Another weird place.
Another weird place, a place that kind of doesn't even exist really, and depending on who you talk to. But it was one of those mehane restaurants which serves like kind of all the little plates. Now no one goes to kind of these tavern restaurants. There's so many in Istanbul as well, but this was one in Lefkoşa.
Right.
And no one goes by themselves, but I did. I was traveling by myself, so I sit in this tavern and just order the meal.
Right.
And so the only choice I had was what my main course meat was going to be. So whatever the kebab or whatever I was going to have. I didn't remember what I had. But then the server just starts bringing out plates. Here's a little bit of cheese. Here's some olives. Here's some dried sausage. Here's some this. Here's some that. Here's some this. Here's another kind of cheese. Here's another kind of olive. Brian, I think I lost track at 22 different dishes before my meal came.
Right.
So then I get my meal, and so as I'm going through all this, and I don't want to leave it much behind.
Right.
And obviously, this is a meal meant for several people, not just one lonely dude.
Right.
But there was a table next to me of locals, and they saw that it was a foreigner dining by himself, and so at one point they send me over some strawberries. They were eating strawberries. So they sent me over a plate of strawberries, and I kind of thank you for that. And then they send me over. Fresh almonds, right? So the ones that are still in the green, like the fuzzy green almonds, which are delicious.
They're amazing.
So some of those, and then they saw I was They sent me some whiskey. Like they were drinking like Johnny Walker Red Label.
Yeah.
So they sent me some whiskey, and then they just said, "Why don't you just join it?"
Right.
So I eventually sit with these guys, and I think one spoke English, and there was a guy who was from Abkhazia, like that breakaway Soviet place, and he was a soccer player, and he was like, it's this bizarre combination of people, and they were saying, oh, the the restaurant owner here, he's some fascist, and this guy's a communist, and it was just this wonderful meal or wonderful time sitting with these guys, and we're just drinking at this point.
Right.
And so there was a woman joined us, and she said I forget her name. She had a pretty name. Like it was Alexandria or something like this, and I remember saying, that's a lovely name. And the guy said, oh, a lovely name for a lovely woman, don't you think? And I'm like, sure. Yeah. And then the Canadian thinks that Alexandria is lovely, and I'm like, oh my god.
Right.
But anyway, so we have this meal, and I'm there afterwards, and now I've been drinking a lot. I've already eaten my meal, and it's getting late. And I say to these guys, listen, I'm gonna go. Like, go? Like we're
just starting.
No, we're about to eat. I'm like, eat? I've been eating for 3 hours.
Right.
I said, no, it's a specialty here. It's macaroni. I'm like, I'm not Italian. I'm gonna get too excited about macaroni.
Right.
He goes, no. He goes, it's not cooked in water. It's cooked in grouse stock. I'm like, all right, well, I'm not going anywhere.
No. Like, I'm just trying to imagine, like, they went and hunted those grouse.
Yeah, and they boiled pasta in the stock. So it comes out as amazing.
Right.
And so I spent another hour with these guys. And at the end of the day, end of the time, I need to go. And I stand up and I reach for my wallet. And the owner slaps my hands.
Right.
And he grabs me by the face and he kisses both my cheeks and he says, "You're not paying a cent for anything." And Brian, I'm not sure how I got back to my hotel. I'm pretty sure that the waiter drove me home.
Right.
And I think we stopped at his house for tea at 4 a.m. before he actually dressed me the rest of my way to the hotel.
Did you have mint tea at that time?
I don't even know what was going on.
Right, yeah.
But that I love it because I had gone to Cyprus. I was writing about politics.
Right.
And I spent a month in that city, on both
enough.
sides of that city. No, but hearing terrible stories,
yes.
mostly, right? Like terrible stories of war and horrible things, murders and massacres, and I just needed a break. And this was the break. Like it was. We didn't say a word about the Cypriot issue. Like we didn't talk about the divided island. We didn't talk about. We just talked about grouse stock.
Right.
And Johnny Walker Red and how pretty Alexandria was. You know, and that really was. It was like the perfect time for that perfect meal.
Isn't that the great equalizer? It is.
Yeah, I think it is.
Like again, you know, I'm sure if you had some of the people who have had that level of trauma with that same table, they would have had a great experience too. Because again, would you think that their opinions would have been comfortably expressed at that table at that time?
No, I don't know. I mean, I think you're right when you say that. Like when you're all sitting there putting the same things in your mouth. It is an equalizer, right? You can't argue when your mouth is full of the best lamb you've ever had.
Exactly.
You know, and so I think that's true. I think travel writers like myself romanticize that a bit too much, though. Like I think this idea that it's a good meal solves all things. It doesn't. But it puts a pause on it sometimes,
it does.
right? And let's face it, like we've all had dinners with our families that have been knocked down arguments about politics or religion or whatever, right? And so it's not as if like the dinner table is a place of peace and tranquility. It often is not. In fact, it's often the opposite.
Right.
But I think traveling to those big meals when you are invited to eat with locals, that is really something special. And I think it's special too because it's not. Everyone knows that it's special, but not everyone has the opportunity to do it, right? Because it depends on the kind of travel that you do.
Yes.
Right?
And also how open you are.
Open you are, and often how alone you are. Right? Because if I was at that restaurant with a date, or with with any other person, I would not have been invited to join that table.
Well,
probably not.
The interesting thing is, like, oddly enough, as married as we were, we still travel individually.
Yeah.
Right? Which is a little commonality here, but because again, nothing against former spouses, but they would not go to some of these places. They would be less comfortable doing these things.
Perhaps. You know what? I wouldn't say that. Not in my case.
Not
She would have been, my ex would have been happy,
Right.
and did join me. She came to Turkey with me. You know, the difference though is, when I travel as a writer, having someone with me is like a buffer between me and the experience.
Right.
Right. It's a distraction, even if it's a happy one. You know, like of course we enjoy traveling with our partners, and of course we do. We love it.
We do.
And not just our partners, with our kids, and whatever. Like this thing we enjoy doing.
Incredible fun.
But it is a completely different experience. And if my job as a writer is to go to a place and witness and experience as much as possible and observe and all that sort of stuff, that's a solitary job.
Yeah.
You can't do that even with a person you love most in the world.
Right.
You have a wonderful vacation. You learn a lot about each other.
Right.
But you don't learn what you need to do as a writer. Like a writer must do something different.
It's amazing when not having to think about somebody else.
Yeah.
You actually.
Yeah, that's part of it too.
Right. You know, you have this more focus on what's there.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I've said this too. I've traveled on assignments with my wife and my son on occasion, and it filled me with such anxiety because I felt I wasn't being a good enough father and husband because I was distracted by the work.
Right.
And then when I do the work, I wasn't being a good enough writer because I was distracted by being a father and a husband.
Right.
And so both experiences suffered because of the other, you know. And so yeah, when I talk to people about travel writing, I'm like, you got to do it alone.
Yeah. Like for me,
You got to do it alone.
I find when I travel to actually get to better food experiences, you almost have to just throw out any sort of filter of anybody else and take every bit of information that you have and just put yourself in as uncomfortable situations as you can, and the amount of experience that you get out of that is phenomenal.
Yeah, you're right,
is.
and it's not just those things,
Right.
but it's also you don't have to compromise.
You don't.
You can be 100% selfish. I want to go here.
Right.
So I'm not hungry. Neither am I. That's not the point. There's something that can be eaten here that I'm dying to try.
Right.
And I don't care if we had breakfast an hour ago.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like I don't care if we have plans later.
Right.
Or whatever it is.
Right.
Or you're a vegetarian, or you're like, no, like this is what's happening right now.
Right.
And then that's, you know, maybe that makes me sound like a dick. But it's, you know, when you're by yourself, you don't have to compromise.
You don't. You go straight ahead. Religiously make tomato sauce every year. Well, are there any other ones like that you do?
No. I don't do that. I don't do anything else as religiously.
Is that a family recipe? Or is
It's not even Brian. It's hardly a recipe.
It's just basically grind the tomato.
It's tomatoes and garlic and oil.
That's
Like
all.
I don't even salt it. I wait till I cook it to salt it. But that's it. I love talking about that because it's interesting. Because Italians in Canada do this, right? They go buy crates and crates and crates of tomatoes, and they buy the San Marzanos when they're in season, which is for like an hour. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so in Calgary, what happens? And I think this happens. I know this happens in Montreal. I know this happens in Vancouver too. I'm sure in Toronto. What happens in Calgary is that somehow there's like a whisper in the wind that the San Marzanos are ready.
Right.
And somehow every Italian woman in town knows.
Right.
And they flock to Crossroads Market.
Right.
And they'll be the truck will pull up and start unloading boxes. Those boxes don't even get to the stand, Brian. Those boxes go into the arms of Italian women,
Right.
who then bring it to their cars,
Right.
And not just one 20-pound case, like multiple 20-pound
Right.
cases. You know, hundreds of pounds of tomatoes.
Right.
My grandfather and grandmother once drove to BC, where the Marzanos are grown,
Right.
and came back with 1,000 pounds of them in a trailer. They hitched a trailer to their van and filled it with tomatoes.
And it was just, they came back with a trailer of tomatoes.
1,000 pounds.
Of tomatoes.
And so
What is 1,000?
it's a lot. It's a lot. And they brought it into the house, and they were all over the house. They got on the floor of that. They were on the floors all over the house.
Right.
And so then the family gets together typically, and this is, I mean, it's not always like this. You know, like when I do it, I do 40 pounds.
Right. Okay.
family gathers. The potatoes have to be peeled. So you need the hot water to peel them, and then now oftentimes my family wouldn't make it into sauce. They just can the tomatoes, right?
Yeah.
But it takes especially when you're talking about these hundreds of pounds, it takes all weekend to do it. And so but you have then, in your pantry, in your cellar, you have all these beautiful jars of tomatoes that you lovingly jarred, in September or August, whatever it is. So Italians in Calgary do this, Italians in Montreal and Vancouver. You know where Italians don't do this?
Where?
In Italy.
I've never seen this. This is a very unique.
You tell Italians that you do this. Italians from Italy, we can tomatoes, and they're like, you can't buy canned tomatoes in Canada.
That's not the point.
That's not the point. and so, but it's really interesting because they won't do it there. So it is really, and I don't even know if when we sit down to do it, this is conscious. In fact, I'm sure that it isn't. But it's a connection. That's an exercise of identity when we sit there, and I don't think anyone thinks about it that deeply because we're just making sauce, and it smells great, and our hands are burning with tomato acid at the end, but that really is like putting up, it's like raising a flag for our identity as Italian Canadians, and I love doing it.
Is that sort of like your stake there, as you say, putting it in the sand? This is me being as Italian as I can.
And that is the most Italian I've ever been.
But how many non-Italians have you dragged into this?
A few.
Okay, and what do they think of it?
I mean, my ex and I did it a couple times. So my sister's husband will do it also. I think they enjoy it. It's fun. It's a gathering. It's a social gathering. We're drinking wine more than likely. And we also really love what comes out of that. Like it's you come home after those weekends or those afternoons, whatever long you're gonna spend, and you have these beautiful jars of beautiful food. And if you don't make lots one year, you use it sparingly. And
how long does it last you, the 40 pounds? All year?
No, all year, he says. All year. No. 4 or 5 months.
Okay.
I didn't do it last year though, and I felt terrible about it. I didn't. Yeah, I would still have some.
Did your son make a note on that?
Sorry?
Did your son realize that he wasn't getting the fresh tomato sauce?
Yeah, maybe. Maybe. I think my sisters and mom did it, and I just didn't join them. But I miss doing it. Like it's a step-by-step process, and like it's the simplest of recipes. It's not even a recipe, really.
No, it isn't.
But it's just great.
I just think, there's something about traditions like that really kind of pulls everybody together. But, when you have everybody's there making the same thing and everybody leaves with jars of tomatoes. Yeah. It's a beautiful thing.
Let me tell you another one that's very unique to my family's part of Italy. Okay. I think I mentioned a bit before the Easter cookies. So there's this, everywhere in Italy has their own kind of unique kind of little cookie that they make, just like everywhere else has their own cookie. Cookies in Iran are also amazing. People talk about Iranian cookies. Jesus.
Beautiful.
Anyway, but at Easter time, we'll make these large cookies, right? And there'll be 3 shapes. For the young boys, you make this big cookie in the shape of a horse. For the girls, you make it in the shape of a doll. It's usually kind of like a girl shape with a dress.
Okay.
But for the older women, it's a heart, not a Valentine heart.
Okay.
Like a heart, like a human heart. So there's little there's little bumps and stuff that represent the aorta. It's
a physical.
It's like anatomically correct.
Okay.
It's just kind of gruesome, and I don't know where this comes from. And no other Italian from any part of Italy do this. As far as I know, I've never met anyone who does this. And so the cookie itself is a very, very dry, kind of bland. It has chocolate chips and almond in it, like kind of like a cakey cookie with a very sweet and hard sugar icing. And then we decorate. So the kids would decorate their horse or their doll with little bits of candy and little Easter eggs and stuff like this. And so we did this for many, and only now, I'm 50 this year, and it's only recently that I didn't get those or that my grand.
So what did the men do? The men.
Men don't do anything. Are you kidding me? What do the men
so
do?
the older women get the heart, the young boys get the horse, and then.
Yeah, they're smoking cigarettes and drinking espresso outside.
Do they eat any of the cookies?
We eat it, and it's not good. Like, it's not good cookie. It's
Right.
dry as it's dry.
Right.
Like you need a gallon of milk to
Right.
get through the. It'll go into the freezers, like deep freeze, and then over the course of the year, you're just breaking off pieces of
Right.
it for a while. Like, and the funny, like the horse,
Right.
we have a cookie cutter that's that shape.
Right.
But those are very hard to find. So those particular cookie cutters are like gold in Italian families, right? Because they're very unique. Because where else are you gonna get that?
You can't get them in Italy anymore?
I don't know. No one else does this.
You know, it's weird because, again, you know, like you show up here as part of the diaspora.
Yeah.
And then you go back there, it's like, this never existed.
Yeah.
Does that kind of blow your mind sometimes?
Yeah.
I know, like for me, where's the Trinidadian food in India?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's closer to Ghana.
Yeah. Sure. It's funny. I remember when my when relatives used to come from Italy, they would. Oh, I'll have a little more. And so they know that going out for food in Canada can't compare to going out for food in Italy, right?
Right, yeah.
So like, what do we bring? What do we bring the Zia and Zio when they come? They would bring them always to like the worst Chinese food buffets, like whatever the biggest Chinese food buffet you can go to,
Right.
where there's 75 lukewarm dishes on under a heat lamp.
Right.
That's what they would bring the Italians to, because they didn't have
Right.
at the time anyway.
Right.
I'm sure now that's not true. But at the time, Chinese food was not readily available.
It's still not readily available.
I bet you it is in the.
Well, look, you know,
I bet you if you're in Rome, you can get Italian
Rome,
food anywhere,
yes, but like
or
you're in
Chinese
Bologna.
food. You don't think you can get Chinese food there? There's not some crappy Panda Express or something like
Something
that.
like that, but you know, like
Yeah.
it's not there. Like, and this is one of the things. Like, I love the Italian food, but when you go to Italy, it's surprisingly non-diverse when it comes down to cuisine.
See, I haven't been since I was a teenager, so you probably know more about what food is like in Italy now than I do.
Like the whole aspect of spiciness is another relative thing in Italy as
It
well,
is.
right? You know, it's like
The further south you go, the more
spicy it gets. But you know, like you go, one of the best experiences I ever had was going up into the hills in Abruzzo because I had some friends in Pesaro, and they said, "Oh, this place they only do 4 things, right? One of them is pasta fagioli, and it was delicious.
Yeah.
There was also this thing they refer to as a spicy sausage, and for the Italians who grew up over there, it's spicy. But you know, like I'm thinking, where is the spicy sausage?
Yeah.
Right? Because again, our level of spice that we're used to. But the other thing too is, you know, like whatever they do is delicious, but you know, there's all these rules around it, and there's not that much variety.
Interesting.
Right? You know, and I found that with Italy. But you know, like Italy, it's all about like once you've been to Italy. I think you've been to the Italy. Have you been to one in?
No.
Okay, but Italy is this entity where you go to it, and the one I got to go to was in Bologna, and it's fascinating because they go around all of Italy, and they do these little stations. It's like IKEA. I know. It's almost like everything the Italians dislike about how to package food. Italy kind of did it,
Yeah,
but
that's true.
they did it well, right? So you overcome a lot of those issues that Italians have about, you know, the way that their culture is presented. But every area is like the best of Campania, the best of Piemonte, and they'd have it with the wines, and they had the food, and it's lovely, right? But it is also by the time you go around, you know, it's like, okay, everybody's got a variation of pasta, and there's all the regionality of pasta, and it's all good. But you know, like when you get used to how in North America, you get used to, I'm going to go out to Vietnamese for lunch today. I'm going to go out and get Chinese. I'm going to go out and get Japanese.
Right.
You know, like that level of access. And this is one of the things I find outside the major centers in Europe. Those don't exist, right? Whereas you go to a small center, even in Lethbridge here, south of us, you know, you'll get Chinese food, you'll get Japanese food and whatnot.
No, it's a testament to our immigration.
Right, just nature of immigration.
yeah.
Because again, you know, like how many people immigrated to Italy versus emigrated from Italy, right?
Yeah.
So I find that a very interesting social phenomenon as well, right?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, I'm sure if you went to Paris, you could find. You probably couldn't find as many you could find maybe I'm just making this up. Maybe you can't find that many great Japanese restaurants, but I bet you can find 100 great Senegalese ones.
I know.
You know what I mean? You know, whereas here we don't. There's like 3 in Canada or something. You know what I mean?
Well, you know, like one place I was lucky to go to is Marseille.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Like the best of African cuisine, right there.
Yeah. I was going to write a book about before I wrote my book about walls.
Right.
My original plan was to write a book about Marseille.
Really?
Yeah. And then it just didn't happen.
Because it really is like this one little hub of Africa.
Yeah,
Like,
and really, and you know, a beautiful city, but a edgy city, and there's and the cuisine.
Yeah. I know one of the things that we have the privilege of is living a boring life here in Canada.
We do,
right? But you know, like when you go to somewhere like Marseille, how do you say it?
Marseille.
Marseille. You go there, it's like the edginess adds to the flavor of the food.
And yes, and the history of colonial.
Yeah. It's all there.
It's all there. Yeah,
it's funny. Like I didn't know that you were going to do that.
Yeah, I was really interested in Marseille and Algeria for a little while there,
and that's the place where you get all the ferries going out to all the North African countries.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Anyhow, good wine down there too.
Yeah, well, yes, I'm sure.
Anyhow, let's wrap this up a little
Sure.
Here. You know, folks, cheers, Marcello. Thank you very much. And folks, I hope you enjoyed a little chat here with Marcello. And you know, thanks again for watching. And if you like what you're seeing, please subscribe. And in the meantime, go out there, enjoy some good food, have some wine, go out there and taste the world. Cheers.
Cheers.